and good evening to the webinar Creative and Caring Compensation with Peter Hall. My name is Francis Wade, in case you have not met me online or somewhere in Caribbean HR forum or LinkedIn or someplace. We've already gotten so people say good evening Denise. If you could go ahead and just say hello in the chat, let me know that you're hearing me loud and clear and that you're seeing me also. Want to make sure that both sides of the equation are working. And Hermes, hi Hermes, and hi Judith. And okay, this part of the evening is working already. All right, so I'm going to just go to the sharing my screen because we have already 17 people with us. And our speaker, I'll bring him up in a minute, but I have some business to conduct first. I guess that's become the norm, just to cover some announcements. Okay, there you go. So if you're here to hear about creative compensation with Peter Hall, you're in the right place. And tonight's session is going to actually be divided into two, much in the same way as we did last week, if you were involved last week. So in the first part of the session, we'll have a presentation, interactive presentation from Peter. He'll be starting at, well, no, in just a minute. We'll go in this mode for about 70 minutes. Then we're going to take questions all the way through, of course, and I'll practice your ability to ask questions in just a minute. We'll be taking a 5-minute intermission and then jumping right back into our discussion and networking session. So Peter has some questions that he is going to pose to us, and he wants us to answer them and work with them as we network and talk with each other and basically enjoy each other's company between 7:15 and about 8:30. That's Jamaica time. And then once we're finished this evening, you're invited. He'll be giving you an invitation to join his compensation coaching circle. And that, as you probably know, our coaching circles are pretty small. Only about 8 to 10 people, and he'll give you the details. So let me make sure you remember how to ask and answer questions here on Remo. So over there on the right, you're typing into the chat portion of the right-hand panel. If you click on Q&A, I'd like you to ask me a question so that I know that you know how to ask questions here on Remo. So go ahead and ask me an easy question. I'll see if I can answer it. There's that pregnant pause as folks flip over and start typing. It flies through the internet. It comes here to Jamaica. How are you today, Judith? Judith, thank you. I'm doing very well. I hope you're doing fine too. Is it raining in Jamaica? Denise asks. No, but it's very overcast and it's supposed to rain this weekend. And Diana, Diana, glad that you made it in. But Diana didn't put a question. More of a statement that lets us know who she is. Great. So what I'm going to ask you to do is during the presentation tonight is to put your questions into the Q&A box, because Peter will be answering the questions at the end. And just to remind you, the entire next year, the next 12 months going up until about April or so, the focus here on Caribbean HR Forum is on HR putting on its own mask first. The whole idea is that HR's development and training and growth has been put on a back burner ever since the recession of 2008. That's when training budgets, they were already cut before, but that's when they were decimated. And HR's training was put way down deep in the basement to happen one day. And this year we're about reversing that in all of our activities. And in particular in our webinars, as you may notice, there's a theme to them. They start with a webinar, they continue with a coaching circle, and at the same time a coaching circle is launched as a public discussion on the topic, and we're building up in this manner until our virtual conference in September. And just in case you're joining us for your first webinar, this is actually it's the third or fourth in the series. It's the fourth in the series, but it's the third leading up to our virtual conference. So the first one had to do with learning, second one had to do with consulting, first one was by Tracy Wallace, second one by me, and the third one tonight is where you see that round yellow, sorry, that round red circle. You're here with Peter Hall. And then coming up in a couple of weeks, we have our next session, next webinar, which is with Ron Johnson and Julie Turney. And the topic is branding, but specifically how to leverage LinkedIn. So one of the things I've noticed is that LinkedIn has never been an HR professional's favorite tool to play with, to put it mildly. And I've always argued that HR professionals should be all over LinkedIn and encourage where I could. However, that's all changed. I don't need to encourage anyone anymore. Why? Because COVID has done all the encouraging that we need. So this is going to be a very important seminar because many of us in the profession are not using LinkedIn. We don't even have a profile, or it's stale, or it doesn't have a picture, or it doesn't have a bio. And I can tell you as a consultant, that's the first place I look when I consider working with someone, is to LinkedIn. So in the future, near future, the other topics that we have coming up have to do with communicating after the lockdown and adjusting, basically going back to work after the lockdown. And as you may remember, we are heading and leading up to the conference in September. Registration is free and technically it's open. We haven't done a really big push, but if you want to register, of course, if you can, and you can send others to register. But there'll be a big push coming up in a month or two. We're still lining up our speakers and getting all the details done behind the scenes. And if you're joining tonight and you're not a member of Carib HR Forum, please take the opportunity to jump in and join us. That's where you can watch the webinars that you have missed. We keep the recordings there. And of course, if you're a member, then you have priority acceptance into one of our coaching circles. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Peter. I'm going to pull him up onto the stage here. Let's do a little fancy work here behind the scenes. If you're on LinkedIn listening, I believe there's some extra space here. I'm going to ask one of our team to add a link to the LinkedIn page so that folks can come and join in if they want to join us here on the community. Okay, so I've just added Peter in. Let me stop sharing my screen. Don't need that. And fingers crossed, there he is. Peter Hall. Peter, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Francis. Thank you very much for your long introduction.
We know each other a long time. Peter, I'm gonna jump off. You want to go ahead and share your screen, and I'll just disappear into the background.
Sure, I'll do that.
But I'll have my mic on.
All right, where has this gone now? Google Chrome.
You're sharing the current screen.
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect. Great. I'm going to disappear.
Okay. Assuming everybody can see that. I'm going to just minimize mine because Francis, I want to be able to see my screen as well as to see your screen. How do I do that?
Disappeared. We need to share screens again. So do that part. Do that part again.
Okay.
It took away your shared screen for some reason.
I'm not sure why it's doing that.
Okay, and then do the trick that you did before. Great. Okay. On our side, what the viewer can do is that the viewer can maximize the screen that has your slides on it if they want to
Right.
do it. So you're fine leaving it just side by side. We have control over which one, who we want to see, you or the slides or both.
Okay. Okay. Well, I just assume that everybody's hearing me. So thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you this evening, and for all of the persons who are on the call. Good evening and greetings from, I'm actually calling you or on the call from Barbados, where I've lived and worked for the past 18 years or so, along with plenty travel in the region. So in terms of this evening, I wanted to just go through a series of interactive discussions. I thought I'd spend a little time just introducing our company, and then to go through those next 5 items in a kind of discussion mode. So I don't have a sexy graph-filled presentation. It's more a conversation with the group here about how well you can prepare yourselves for the compensation challenges that are going to be inherent in the post and immediate period of the pandemic. So my quick introduction, I won't spend a lot of time on it, is this. It's just to share with you that we've been in business since 2008. That's LPD Hall Associates. It's basically a family-owned business, but I say that guardedly only because a lot of our work gets done along with associates. Francis being one of those, and others. We work with many associates from the region as well as from the US, from the UK, Canada, and so on, depending on what sort of client work we're actually doing. My work prior to being in the company was in human resources with the Diageo business as well as with First Caribbean International Bank, where I did the HR and marketing functions for the First Caribbean business at any rate across the Caribbean region. Our practice is currently Caribbean-wide, so we have clients from Jamaica in the west, Cayman Islands in the west there, right through to Guyana in the south. Primarily English-speaking, but we do some work in Central America as well, and we have a few candidates in the UK and Canada. Our focus is basically on helping organizations to improve performance through people, process, structure, and culture, any or all of those. Basically, working with clients to identify where hotspots or opportunities for improvement may be. And when we speak about improvement here, we speak about commercial improvement. So helping companies to make more money, but making more money in an environment where people, process, and structure are creatively and positively oriented. So that leads to many, many different types of bespoke interventions or supports that could range from helping an entity to merge or two entities to merge, helping an entity to develop its executive team through leadership coaching and leadership development. It could be through working to improve how organizations engage their employees. It could be helping organizations to take cost out. So basically anything that involves those 4 dimensions of an organization that is evolving. We love what we do, and as I said, we work with many associates. My primary associate at the moment, David, who is actually my brother, who used to work with Texaco Chevron in Jamaica, was to be on the call today, but he apologizes. But he has been flowed by not having any for the last 24 hours. Apparently, there's some system in Kingston which is preventing flow from getting people internet. So unless anybody has any questions from you around our business and what I've just shared with you, I can move on to the next slide. And I'll just ask if anybody has any questions, they can shoot them there on the Q&A. And maybe Francis, you can alert me to if I'm missing any, please. Are you hearing me, Francis? Well, if I'm talking to myself.
No, man, are you hearing me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you now. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay, so if I were to move to the first slide where we're basically talking about compensation in the now, meaning what's happening today, precisely today, with respect to compensation in many organizations, given the pandemic. I'm pretty sure for many of you, you will have heard language like no sacred cows, cut costs now, do it today, and various other such phrases. And if you are experiencing that, you can send a nod through the system. So I'm not guessing. I'm just trying to make sure that what I'm suggesting here is actually happening. Certainly, with the CEOs that I have spoken to over the last few weeks, cost is probably a #1 issue in terms of survival. But while this is the case, what happens here is that with this request to reduce costs, a lot of tensions are going to be released in the organization. So these are tensions between how we get things done, power over or power with. So are we going to just push things through the organization and just slash and burn, or are we going to work with the organization? And again, a lot of that depends on the internal culture, and I'm going to come to that later. But these tensions are going to be released with some force. Tension between functions and leaders of functions, where organizations that are prone to being stovepiped and are not great at what we call cross-functional leadership or horizontal thinking are going to also have those tensions released. We're going to have slash and burn versus creative alignment as a tension also being released. And there are many, many others. And I would ask you to think about, as a question here, what tensions are you currently witnessing in your business that are being released as a consequence of the demands of the CEO or the board or the executive to take costs out? Are you experiencing that now today? Let me pause and see if anybody has any answers to those. If you're having any such experience, that is, of course. The notion here is that with the urgency, and in some senses, people will get a sense of, I guess, panic. A lot of many different types of polarities are going to emerge in the organization and the associated tensions. And we need to be aware of these before we even begin to think about how we might resolve some of the issues. You had a comment, Francis.
Right, Deborah says slash and slash.
Slash and slash, okay.
Which is not even burn, I think it's just saying
not even,
just slash and slash. And
Indeed.
She's the only comment we have so far, but you can go ahead and
okay.
I'll pick them back up.
All right, great. So that's the first kind of realization, then, to kind of ground ourselves and figure out what's happening and to do it with awareness. Because what you want to be doing when you're going into kind of decision mode is to be aware of these tensions. So that you can be in kind of full consciousness. Effective leaders who are going into actions and conversations without full consciousness are going to be less effective. So that is just understanding that very, very top line. Then the next thing is around organization context. And this is kind of specific to your organization. Your ability and capacity to treat with compensation questions is going to be dependent on a number of questions. So, for example, how agile is your organization? We could go into a long definition of agility, but agile organizations are organizations where they're flat, where lots of teams get together and resolve things very quickly, and basically they have a significant remit and resources to go and just get things done. Most organizations in our environment are not that agile. So again, if that's been your experience, I'd happy to take a comment from you on that. But knowing how agile your organization is important, because otherwise you will create expectations that cannot be delivered in terms of compensation changes. Similarly, what is the appetite for change? Some organizations will say, I don't care how you do it, just get it done. But in most instances, this is going to require change at a process level, at a communications level, at a policy level, and in some cases, with the severity that we're experiencing now, these changes are going to be impacted by the legal environment as well. So if your organization doesn't have appetite for change, then that is something you need to take account of. How good is your organization getting it done? In other words, is your organization, once you make a decision and everybody's on the same page, that you go and get it done and you have 100% completion? Or are you an organization that everybody kind of gets together, have a decision, and then you start to second guess, you find you don't have the resources, things begin to fall apart, or you are depending on too few people to get it done? Organizations that are good at getting it done are, again, more agile, very, very clear on who is doing what, when, how, to what date, to what time, to what scope, to what scale. Again, so just having a sense in terms of where am I in this kind of big picture is important, because otherwise you will delve into compensation dynamics and potential, if you like, solutions that are not in fact implementable and will cause you and the organization problems. How decisions get made. Is HR already at the table? Many people in organizations, HR is not at the table now. So how is that going to help them if they're in a crisis mode as they are now? Can they get onto the table quickly? Is that going to just limit the scope and scale of what can actually be done? So spending some time, again, having that clarity as an HR leader in your organization is pretty critical. Just assessing there are other questions I could ask here, but it's just understanding the context that you're operating in is very, very critical. Otherwise, you'll waste your time, your team's time, the organization's time, and so on. So just a quick check-in here is that something that you have given some thought to, that you're actually experiencing? Just a little feedback if you can in the comment section around whether this approach is making some sort of resonating with your experience or what you think would be useful. I'm not sure if any comments are coming in there, Francis, so I will continue. Francis?
Comments coming in?
I am looking now at the chat.
Click on chat.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay.
So you want me to read them off, and then you can.
Yeah, that's great.
So Hermes says very relevant. Then he says HR comes to the table during dessert. That's what you want. HR. Boy, you should talk about that. HR is at the table and at work every day, remotely and fully on site. Sean says so. In his situation, HR is right in the middle of it. So we have everywhere from dessert to being right
okay.
there and fully on site.
Okay. All right. Well, the great thing there is having that awareness, because as the HR leader, it is what it is, as they say, but you need to calibrate what you can and cannot do given that organization context. So if you're only at the table for dessert, the organization should not expect more than dessert from you. If you're at the table fully, then you can help them to provide a more wholesome meal. I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but because there's always room to leverage your position all the time, so to improve and to get more space at the table. But doing that in a crisis environment is more challenging. So just to be aware that if you decide to do that, then you're adding a dimension of work to what you are going to be taking on with respect to the specifics of communications.
So three more. You want to hear the additional comments real quick?
Yes, please.
Sure, that we don't have to change your screen. Miguel says, what you're saying is relevant. The public service scores are low on most, if not all of these variables. Orlando says, HR is only invited to the table when a mess was created and there needs to be a cleanup team available. Boy, that sounds like COVID on a whole. And Carol is echoing the comment, I think, about the dessert. We need to leverage your position at the table.
Right.
Okay, that's what we have so far.
Okay, fantastic. So the next question then is about yourselves. That's you. When I say me and the team, I mean everybody here on the call and your teams, meaning the HR function and indeed the wider team, but more specifically here, the HR team, since you are going to be the technicians of the with others who working in the finance area and so on. But self-honesty with respect to these questions is important because it will, let us say, help to determine the scope and scale of what you can take on. So the question I normally start with is, what is your current depth of knowledge of the business? And by that I mean depth on the commercial side. So beyond knowing how many people work in the organization, beyond knowing how many trainings were done and so on, what is your understanding of how the business makes money? What is your understanding of the company's P&L? What is your understanding of the company's balance sheet? What is your understanding of the company's strategy, and have you contributed to it? Because the further you are down that knowledge is the more leverage you're going to have as a practitioner in the environment. And I'll come to that a little later. So what's the current shape and level of complexity of your compensation systems? So again, if you have very complex systems that are wired to all kinds of HR actual technology systems, but also have components like long-term incentive plans, short-term incentive plans, multiple types of pension schemes, and so on. This is also adds obviously context and scope for different types of interventions. So again, that's an important thing to know as part of your leadership of the HR function. What is the shape in totality of my compensation systems, including things which are intrinsic and extrinsic, so including base pay, including benefits, including pensions. And I'm saying all this to say that the range of options that we could potentially have to adjust cost are significant, depending on the size of the business, depending on the complexity, because we could be talking about taking things on and off the balance sheet that would create financial space. We could be talking about identifying areas outside of HR that other people have not identified that are going to save you the pain of taking people out of the business that you could potentially put forward. So it's very critical to be self-honest around what your knowledge is. If you have limited knowledge, again, it means that you're going to have a limited ability to create an opportunity and range of options for the business or the organization to remove cost. The next point I have here is about, am I a one-person band? In other words, are you the person in HR, or do you have a team of technicians that is going to help you do what needs to get done? In many organizations, we end up with it's one or two people in the HR function who are doing all the work, who have all the skills, who have all the knowledge, who have all the understanding, and we basically overburden them and things can collapse. So that's also important to understand. And that includes systems. Because if we're talking about doing analysis quickly, it has to be done importantly. So a very critical understanding is, where am I on this page? Where am I? So let me pause here and get a sense of that. So if we were to say around the table here of the 15 or 20 people who are on the call today, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think my knowledge and real depth of understanding is at a 9. You might want to raise your hand and tell me, or if you think, well, I think I'm closer to a 4 or whatever that may look like. Just get a sense of what that spread is. You can just put it into the chat so we can have a look and see. And this is a critical point for credibility.
So we have a 7 coming in.
Nice, I see that. Nice, Denise. 6.5, nice. I like the 0.5. Okay, lots of 6s. So we're kind of middle of the road, maybe a little better than middle of the road. So great stuff. Again, having this understanding is important because, again, it might mean that if your understanding is limited, then you might need some help. So when they say, well, where would I get that help from? Can I get that help internally? Do I need to go outside the company? Whatever. But if you take it on with the current knowledge that you are feeling that you're not quite there, that can also lead to problems, because it means that your solutions may not be sufficiently anchored in the commercial understanding of the business. So again, an important part of context even before we begin to talk about headcount and the rest of it. So the next area we talk about is fact basing. In all of the assignments that certainly I have done more recently, with respect to compensation in particular, you have to fact base. So, and by that I mean you have to be able to present the organization in terms of how it is set up to a person. And by that I mean you should have a line of sight to every inch of cost that is in the company by headcount. And you should be able to slice and dice that so you can show the information in different ways. You can show the information by administrative function. You can show it by different business units. You can show it by demographic. You can show it by earnings per employee. You can show it by employee engagement score. You need to be able to present the organization pretty much in any way that is going to potentially give you an insight to where costs might lie or where the opportunity for delaying costs might lie. And again, that's down to a person. And I use the word person here because at the end of the day, we're talking about people when we're talking about headcount. And one of the elements of today's discussion is about how do we address the issue of cost in an environment where care is at utmost importance. Right now in the world, as you would all know, looking after each other and taking care of humanity is the number one item. I think I would say that most people around this table would be agreed. So how do we balance that tension between caring, but also creating an avenue for our organizations to survive and to do so respectfully? So this is also a very important point, and many HR leaders are light on this. When CEOs ask them for information, they have to go away and take 2 days to come back. There are lots of analytical tools that are available now that allow you to use Excel-based data to look at the organization in different ways. And basically what you would be needing to do is that if you say, I think solution X is to do a particular intervention, and your CEO says, well, how is that going to affect everybody in sales? You need to be able to say, it's going to affect these 15 people in this way, these 20 people in this way, these 40 people in this way. If you can't do that again, the credibility issue becomes pretty. We're not good. Yeah. So, and this is again across all dimensions of compensation. And I have in red there at the bottom, being able to do this also creates what I've labeled here as permutation development capability. That is to say, what you are doing by looking at the data that is there is creating the ability for your team and for the organization as a whole to look at different permutations of managing that cost out in a way which sustains the business as well as the one which creates the opportunity for the business to take that cost out. You don't need huge technology for this. What you need is Excel and people who can enter data into Excel. Even if you don't have a big, sexy HR system, you just need to have someone who can kind of invest the time in putting the basics into Excel just to get it going. But again, without this, you're basically vulnerable to error and also vulnerable to making mistakes. And again, that's a credibility issue. So this is a huge and important element of taking things forward. Let me pause there and get a sense from the group here as well about what is your current fact basing capability? Is it at 5? Is it at 6? Is it at 10? What is it? Because if you can't fact base, you're basically walking around in the dark. Let me pause there and see if there are any comments coming through the chat about my our fact basing capability currently. I see a 9, lovely. I see a 8. Lots of 8s, 7s. Good, but that's good. That's excellent. That's excellent. Okay, so I see a 9 here as well. Wow, okay, great. And then somebody's saying here that they would get additional help from technology. That's great as well. And again, this is a great idea, bringing people from other functional areas to assist in either, creating programs that can help you investigate data. And one critical element here is also about how you share that data. Helping to visualize data around employee compensation is important. It is obviously anchored in numbers, but how you can show that by using different charts and tables is very, very helpful to the wider organization when you're looking at opportunities as well. That's more about helping people to visualize what you're seeing. So beyond just understanding the numbers and making sure they're right, it's also how you present. And there are actually software out there that can help you to do that as well. But a very, very important part of addressing the compensation issues are around this very, very critical area of fact basing. Okay, so if we were going to think about what our approach should be, what we're suggesting here, first of all, is that you would kind of start from where you want to end. And I recognize that the end is also fluid, so it need not be an end that is finite, but you want to start somewhere. So if somebody is saying to you /////, you need to have a number that you're working from, what that looks like. But before we go there, I want to go back to a point that I made earlier around your ability to contribute outside of HR in helping to determine where those costs should come out. So leaders who are in the HR area, but who are also commercially aware and who can read a P&L should be looking at that P&L very closely at all operational costs. So looking at every line item in the P&L that has a cost attached to it, and looking at the trend, and looking at what the likely trend would be given where the organization is today, to see where there may be other opportunities for a cost to come out, which would relieve the need to remove people as a first shot. So this would include things like your marketing expenses. Also, it would include interesting things like depreciation, because it could be possible that some items that are being depreciated now could be depreciated at a different rate, given the fact that if you're working in a financial services institution, for example, you have suspended people from paying you. It means that the way that we look at depreciation could potentially be challenged. All of these things have to be checked against financial accounting standards and so on. The point I'm making here is that do your homework around looking at where other costs could potentially come out. For those of you who are running DB schemes, these are defined benefit pension schemes. This may be an opportunity to look at those, because defined benefit schemes also have a drag on companies' balance sheet. So if there's an opportunity to look at DB schemes now and create an avenue where you can shift people from DB to DC now will be the time to do that. So again, it's looking for every conceivable avenue that is creative, that is respectful to the employee, but is also creating a financial opportunity that helps us to do compensation in a way, as I said, which is caring, but also addressing the need for the business and the organization to survive. So again, that starting point, which is the big number, your CEO says to you, well, I need to get X million out, should, in my view, be looked at in the context of, well, where is this cost coming out? So that there's some sort of understanding about how the organization approaches that, as opposed to just jumping to cut headcount. But back to the point again, if you can't investigate a P&L and you can't investigate a balance sheet, and you may need help to look at how, for example, the point I made earlier about DB to DC, all these things are big opportunities for some organizations that have not explored them up to this point. So let me pause there and see whether or not, if there's anybody in the group here that has kind of had that kind of flashpoint where they say, well, actually, what's happening in marketing in terms of cost, what's happening in other areas, operations in terms of cost, what's happening in terms of other areas such as depreciation, so that we do have a really robust trawl of cost in the organization and bring the organization to that point of truth with respect to cost. Is anybody experiencing that currently, or felt that they have the ability to do that? If you could talk in the chat, that would be great. Let me get a sense.
While we wait for the comments to come in, are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you loud and clear, Francis, yes.
Yeah, the sense I have is that if I were the CEO asked for X million dollars of cuts, and then HR were to pop out and say, yes, and a comprehensive look at our business would show that the cost would come out in the following years as well, that people would fall out of their chairs. I mean, the CEO would have a heart attack, the CFO would immediately start defending, and the rest of the executive team would, in most of the executive teams I've worked with, they'd be in shock if the conversation were to go that way. Have you had that experience where an HR leader has gone addressed the total costs and had the executive team either push back or react in shock or just nod their head numbly? What has happened when people have done that?
You're directing that question at me or the group?
To you, yes.
Right. Well, I mean, I think my sense of it is that organizations are a little bit more mature now. Again, I'm not sure of the profile of the group here, but I would expect that it's a very reasonable question for the HR, and indeed the CEO should be asking it of everybody. And indeed, the discussion around costs coming out should be one for the entire leadership. So it's not so much about HR insisting that, well, if I must take out costs, then so must somebody else. It's about a collective response to a collective problem, and also in the context that our organization's responsibility is to their customers and to their employees, and if we can find a way to address those which in a balanced way, so that we're not simply just looking for the opportunity to remove cost out in a slash and burn way, I think it's useful. I'm thinking that I've had one or two instances where obviously you as an HR person you raise issues around cost in other areas, and people may get a little bit kind of chuffed by it, but our responsibility is to bring those discussions to the table, and in a way which is free of emotion, and basically helping the organization overall to address a wide issue. This is not about HR versus marketing or operations. It's about an organizational challenge. And I think in the group here, we have people who have said that they are HR leaders at the table, and certainly, if that's the case, that should be something that is quite achievable.
Right. Right. Let me read
So
a couple of
I see
comments.
Lucette. James mentioned that she has not looked at depreciation, but they had looked at DB plans years ago. But as she's accurately pointing out, the whole organization, including HR, should be combing through that P&L, combing through it, just to be able to put ourselves in a position where we are, as an employer, high moral ground. High moral ground. That should be our objective, high moral ground. So starting where you want to end. At the same time, one of the key dimensions is about flexibility. So, and I use the term flexibility here to include flexibility around the different dimensions of how you would go about this. So there's flexibility in terms of, should we just take cost out? Should we basically put people on vacation? Should we? Many companies, for example, have unused vacation of vast amounts. Should we, with the support of the unions and so on, arrange for that vacation to run off, so it ceases to be a cost on the books, but it allows people to continue to be paid, but we don't carry that cost going forward. Flexibility in terms of if we were to do things on a rotating basis, so that some employees get affected in month 1, 2, 3, others get affected in month 4, 5, 6. There are different things that you could do. For example, you might say, let's take a holiday against benefits. You might say, okay, health benefit you might not want to lose right now, given where we are now, but are there other benefits that you might say, let's just take a holiday off of that for the next 6 months, and then by doing that, we can reduce the numbers of people that would actually have to leave, or maybe not have to have anybody leave at all. These things depend on the ratios that exist between base pay and other costs, which are usually between 60 to 40. It depends on the business as well. But again, if you have a excuse me, a 60-40 ratio of benefit to base, that's a reasonable chunk of funds that you can probably explore in terms of giving you flexibility. So I use the term flexibility both in terms of implementability, but also flexibility in terms of how you might address cost, in terms of, instead of just going straight to headcount, are there other things that we can do? And I recognize that in many organizations, we have to go the employee engagement route through the unions, because obviously many organizations, if not most, are unionized in Jamaica. Also, we can't do it without bearing reference to the governance required for it, and including legal. That means that, you know, anything that we do still has to, even within the emergency environment that we are, be compliant with the legal environment and have the appropriate governance. Otherwise, what will happen at the end of the day is that post-COVID, all employees will be sued to kingdom come. So we want to avoid that. And then anything that we design also has to be implementable, but also with credibility. So we can't say, well, this is implementable because we can do it. It has to be implementable with credibility. So it's that tension between, again, just ripping out cost because we can do it, as opposed to implementing something which has the kind of transparency and respect, although it would come with pain for some employees, I'm sure. It has to have that credibility. And that's about a point just below, which is around communications. How this gets communicated is as important as the solution itself. I don't think anybody in the chat would need to be reminded of that or to be reinforced that. You know, communications, especially now, because in organizations where there is, at this point, even a low level of trust, that is going to be also put under a lot of pressure now. I would be interested to learn from the group as well, how many organizations are currently in an environment where they have a lower level of trust, because that's also a critical kind of contextual point, which again needs to be, if you're an HR leader, you need to be aware of. I think one of the things, I'm seeing something here again from Lucette about retaining non-performers and so on. Again, it's an important point around how you would select people again. And again, that has to be done carefully, and again, kind of high moral ground again. In this environment, we don't want the organizations to be in a situation where it is perceived that they're using the pandemic to achieve ends other than their if I can use that term. It's difficult, but and it's easy to fall into that trap. And unions will beat you up for it very, very hard if you go that route, would be my suspicion. So starting from where you end, flexibility both on the design side as well as flexibility on the implementing side, engagement with unions and employees. Again, I'm not sure, has anybody here in the chat, when we talk about engagement, thought about having focus groups with employees to say, well, you know, if we have to take out costs, how we should do it, and get a sense from the employees. Has anybody done that? Quick question. Oftentimes, employees have the answer, but we don't really want to hear it from them because we're experts. But I would recommend to everybody in this room that if you took 10 employees and put them in a room and said to them, look, guys, we have to do this, what do you think? Tell us what we do. They will tell you. They will tell you. So that's also, when I speak about engagement, I'm not just talking about, you know, sending out a note from the CEO thanking people for their service. It's about how do we engage the full brains of the business to resolve what is a very sticky and situation. So you may not call it a focus group, but again, I think getting a sense from employees as to, you know, what would they be willing to look at in terms of addressing it, and you'll be able to kind of throw it into the mix. I have just at the bottom of the slide here about reviewing and improving. Again, as you go along, you will learn a lot. Some things work better than others, and you can look at how you might ramp up a particular activity if it's proving to give you great results, and improve where there is opportunity to improve the scope of something or otherwise. I think for everybody in the chat here, every organization right now is faced with cash flow problems. So my suggestion would be that any issue that you're looking at in terms of cost, while there's opportunity to look at what you would call deferred cost, what organizations are not so looking at that. No, they want to look at what is impacting my cash flow today. So that's one thing I would recommend. I'm seeing a point here from Tracy around profit sharing. Again, if that's an annual thing, obviously many organizations' profit is going to be affected now. So again, to the extent that that is something that can be looked at, fine. But profit sharing is normally a function of profit. So it's not a ongoing cash. What organizations want now is to be paying out less cash. That's what the issue is. The issue is cash and liquidity. And for those of you who are working in the financial services in particular, liquidity is a massive item because you have to meet certain standards for your capital requirements because you're a regulated industry. So let me pause there and see if there are any comments around that, around the, has anybody done any engagement? I'm seeing some points there. Has anybody done any understanding of the legal requirements? I'm not sure whether if in Jamaica or anywhere else, anybody's looking at changes to the environment or suspension of certain legal things given where we are. I know in Barbados, which is where I'm calling from, there are discussions in the government, private sector, and unions around how certain requirements now for laying up people are going to be reviewed, just to be pragmatic around the immediate situation. So again, let me pause here and see if there are any other points coming through the chat. Francis, are you seeing any further ones?
Yeah, but just to give you a time check, we have about 6 more minutes for your presentation. You want to take more questions, or you want to go?
I'm actually at the end now. This is my last slide. So.
Oh, great. Okay.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
All right.
Yeah.
So there's some comments here from Sean. He says no such conversations yet here in Antigua, but I've seen Barbados taking the lead. I think he's talking. Go ahead.
These are the conversations taking place in the government, private sector, and union environment here. Yeah.
Right.
Barbados has a slightly different orientation to these tripartite discussions, which, as you know, have existed here for many, many years. So you're right, Sean, in saying that Barbados has kind of, on this point, is a little bit further ahead of, well, in fact, most of the countries in the region in terms of genuine discussions at a very high level between government, business, and unions. But I think it's going to be a point for those of you who have networks in the government or your employer organization. I think one of the things that you should be doing is to be looking at how organizations can be relieved of some of the costs attached to employees being laid off and otherwise as a means of retaining them in the long term, as well as giving the company the opportunity to continue operations. So I think it's a conversation that should be explored at that level for sure.
In response to your questions earlier about employee engagement, there were a round of no's. No focus groups. But there was an invitation given and suggestions were submitted. So it does work. It's just that it's not a popular technique for companies to be using.
Right. It has to be done carefully because obviously once you bring employees into a room and start to have that conversation, you're potentially creating expectations. So how you will do that has to be crafted, very well. And again, you have to be very transparent and say, these are exploratory, because like everything else, you're creating an expectation. When you bring them into a room, they want to hear, okay, well, what did you do with my suggestion? So you have to kind of work it through. before you do that. So I can see why people would not rush to do it, but there's an immense amount of opportunity there. Again, and if we're talking about implementing with credibility, that's the group that's going to say you did it well or not. So it's a very rich source of information and trust building in terms of organization to employee relations. I'd recommend it, definitely. I've never seen an employee engagement activity like that really go very, very bad. Even if companies make errors initially in terms of how quickly they respond to contributions and so on, it usually can deliver more positive than negative. But again, care needs to be taken. So as I mentioned earlier, today I'm just going to wrap up here now and go to the very top of the presentation. And just to remind everybody that, knowing what your environment is and being clear what that is, knowing the capacity and strength of your team, and then being able to fact-base, because fact-base is about permutation development. And without permutation development, again, you're going to be guessing. And if you do the fact-basing very well, then you will be able to do permutations very well, and you get the best results that are available to you. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that everybody found it useful. I'll just go to the very last slide now to remind everybody that we are, as Francis had said earlier, holding a coaching circle for those who would want to participate, where we can delve into more detail around how you would approach any of these and other related items in the compensation area. A lot of it is about the culture in the organization and the appetite for change, as well as the capability of the team to deliver opportunities for taking out cost or reshaping how compensation is delivered for the future. So thank you everybody for listening. It's been a pleasure to be here with you in this section, and I look forward to the networking section, which is starting in, I believe, in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Great, Peter. If you can unshare your screen so I can share mine. Great. So I'm going to share my screen, and boy, we could definitely keep going, because you are, and you know what, in the networking that's coming up, Peter's going to be hanging around, guys. So don't waste this opportunity to spend time with him. He can only hold 4 people at a table, but you want to grab some time with him if you have some specific questions. Don't let this opportunity go by. So we're going to move into the networking session. Starts at a 1:45, which is about 3-4 minutes time, and that's the link that you want to follow in blue. I'm going to keep the link up as we go ahead. As you go into the networking session, if you're brand new to Remo, a couple of things that you want to pay attention to. The first is that you want to make sure to turn on your camera and your microphone at the bottom of the screen so that you can talk and see other people. When you turn it on, it goes from red here to green, right? And if you're brand new, I've never seen the Tech Tips video, there's a video at the top of the screen that you can click and watch. It's about 3-4 minutes long. It tells you some of the things to watch out for when you're doing Remo. And then finally, I want to tell you about our sponsor for the evening. So you probably saw in our information that went out, the graphics, that we have a sponsor for this session, this webinar, and also for the next few months here at CaribHRForum.com. The company is called Mark Rim, and if you've been around CaribHR Forum, you probably know that they have sponsored us before. This is not the first time, but this is a much bigger sponsorship in terms of their involvement. It's a very important year. And what they're doing is very different this year. They're coming out with a salary trends survey. Now, the good news is that it's going to cover 19 Caribbean territories. It's going to capture the delta or the changes that are happening in compensation as a result of COVID. So as Peter said, and as you know, this is going to be a year of changing compensation like there never has been before. So you want to be prepared. And one way that you can be prepared is to have your organization be involved in the survey and use the data, the summaries that come from that in order to help you in your ongoing decision making. Now, unfortunately, most companies are going to have to cut before the survey is complete in around September or so. But having that data in hand will tell you whether you cut too much, not enough. It's the difference between basically making decisions by the seat of your pants, driving in the dark, and having some actual data that tells you, here's what's happening across the region, here's what our competitors are doing, here's what industries are doing, here's what other countries are doing. Okay, so strongly recommend that you get your company involved, and when you get into the other room, if you click on this button here, it'll take you to a sign up link where you can sign up for more information about the survey. And again, it's absolutely free. Okay, so grab that link that's at the top. It kicks in at about 7:15. We're going to get shut out of here in about 1 minute's time. So once again, I want to thank Peter for his time and expertise. It's very, very rare that someone like him would come and share with us. So Peter, thank you very much for the time that you spent with us.
It's been a pleasure, Francis, and pleasure to have met everybody on the chat. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Great. So I'm going to stop the sharing, stop the recording at this point, stop the sharing, and then we can log out of here. And remember, don't forget that URL. I think we should type it. I'm going to type it in the chat real quick just in case anybody missed it. And it's bit.ly/coach part2. And thank you, everyone. We're going over to the other room now. How some strange. Went to a strange place. Huh, that was weird. It took me somewhere weird first. Try it again.